The year was 1864, and London shimmered beneath 1,000 gaslights, its grand ballrooms flickering with the illusion of perfection. Beneath chandeliers that scattered gold across marble floors, ladies in satin gowns and gentlemen in tailored grace danced as if reputation itself were a waltz. In that glittering world of whispers and wealth stood Lady Eleanor Whitmore, a vision of quiet elegance in ivory silk. Her beauty, so refined it might have softened even envy itself, if only envy did not thrive among the titled and the cruel. That evening, the Whitmores were to host their annual winter ball at Grosvenor Square, the kind that drew dukes, viscounts, and every fluttering rumor London could carry. Eleanor had prepared for it as she did for every social ordeal, with restraint, grace, and the faintest trace of dread. Her husband, Lord Henry Whitmore, was a man carved of ambition rather than affection, a politician whose smile held promises as hollow as the applause he craved. For years, he had whispered the language of power, while their marriage fell into the polite silence of convenience. When the orchestra struck its first note, Eleanor moved among the guests like a ghost of grace, her smile practiced, her words gentle, her eyes distant. She had long learned that society preferred its women decorative and voiceless. Yet beneath that fragile composure lay a heart still capable of hope. Hope that perhaps, one day, affection might replace civility in her husband's gaze. But fate, as London knew too well, had no patience for quiet hearts. The turning began with laughter, sharp, tinkling, and merciless. Across the ballroom, a circle of ladies murmured behind jeweled fans. Their gazes darted toward Eleanor, and one could almost feel the shift in the air. Curiosity laced with cruelty. Lord Whitmore had entered, resplendent in black and ivory, his confidence cutting through the crowd like a blade. By his side stood Lady Beatrice Linwood, a widow of recent fortune and dangerous charm. The pairing was inappropriate, yet none dared speak, until he did. "Forgive me," Henry declared, glass raised high, voice ringing with the ease of one born to perform. "But London should know, the Whitmore line shall not continue. My wife, alas, is without the blessing of heirs." The orchestra faltered. The ballroom fell to a hush so complete that the crackle of candles sounded like thunder. Eleanor stood still, her hand frozen upon her fan. The words hung in the air, cruel, deliberate, and irreversible. She felt them pierce her not with volume, but with precision. Around her, faces shifted, pity, relief, triumph. Some women smirked behind lace, others sighed, as if reassured that fate could wound even the most graceful among them. She did not speak. She could not. The rules of London society had long forbidden a woman's defense against a husband's cruelty. Her silence, though born of pride, was mistaken for confirmation. Henry basked in his audience's sympathy, savoring the applause of those too polite to name betrayal as such. When he turned toward Lady Beatrice, the gesture was unmistakable, a man freed from his duty, seeking a future unencumbered. The narrator of this age, had it won, would have called a spectacle, but for Eleanor, it was dissection. Every gaze upon her felt like a scalpel carving away what little safety she had left. She curtsied, lips trembling not with tears but with restraint, and excused herself from the crowd. No one stopped her. No one ever does when virtue falls from favor. Outside, snow had begun to fall, each flake catching the light of the ballroom windows like shards of mercy denied. Her carriage awaited, black against white, the Whitmore crest shining faintly on its door. As she stepped in, the city's hum dimmed, and the weight of her silence settled around her shoulders like a shroud. Inside the carriage, her reflection quivered in the frost-clouded glass. Her thoughts drifted not to vengeance, but to memory, the laughter of her girlhood before titles and expectations, before love became a transaction. She thought of the child she had once prayed for and the endless nights spent hiding her disappointment behind embroidery and poise. The cruelty of Henry's announcement was not in its falsehood, but in its exposure. What had once been private sorrow was now public theater. As the horses clattered through the slush of Mayfair, a figure on the steps of the ballroom paused to watch her depart. The Duke of Ashbourne, tall, reserved, known for both his wealth and his restraint, stood with one gloved hand resting on the railing. His eyes, gray as the Thames in winter, followed the departing carriage with a quiet ache no one else noticed. He had known Eleanor once, distantly, formally, and yet her humiliation struck him with unexpected force. In a world where virtue was measured by gossip, he saw in her composure something rare, courage disguised as calm. Inside the carriage, Eleanor's maid whispered, "My lady, shall I send for your physician?" Eleanor shook her head. "No. What can a physician mend when it is the world that is ill?" They rode through the silent streets until the glow of the city faded behind them. Snow fell thicker now, muting the sound of hooves, erasing all trace of where she had been. When the carriage reached the townhouse at Cavendish Square, she stepped down, dismissed the driver, and stood alone beneath the gaslight. Inside, the fire had long since died. She crossed the empty drawing room, trailed her fingers across the mantelpiece, and found the one thing still untouched, a framed miniature of her wedding day. Her younger self smiled from behind glass, full of innocence and promise. She placed it face down. That night, as the last bells of midnight faded, a messenger arrived. The letter he bore was sealed with her husband's crest, coldly formal, written by a solicitor's hand. It offered her freedom from their union on grounds of incompatibility, with a polite suggestion that she retire to the country. The signature below was his, bold and unrepentant. Eleanor folded the letter once, twice, then laid it upon the dying embers of the hearth. The paper curled, blackened, and vanished into ash. "So be it," she whispered. Outside, the city continued to dance, oblivious. And somewhere beyond those glittering streets, the Duke of Ashbourne turned from the window of his own carriage, his breath fogging the glass. The sight of her humiliation haunted him, as if fate had demanded a witness. He said nothing, but within him something unspoken stirred, a quiet vow that London's cruelty would not be the last word in her story. The snow kept falling. The night, though merciless, felt suddenly changed, like the first chapter of a tale not yet finished. Winter passed with the quiet dignity of endurance. By February, Lady Eleanor Whitmore had vanished from the polished salons of London, her name surviving only as gossip whispered between teacups. To the city, she was a story concluded, a fallen lady exiled to the countryside, remembered only when scandal grew scarce. Yet in truth, Eleanor was not broken. She had retreated to the estate of her late father in Kent, a manor of ivy and memory, where frost laced the windows and the roses in the garden slept beneath snow. There, stripped of the noise of society, she learned the strange freedom of silence. The house, once filled with the laughter of her girlhood, stood nearly empty. The servants spoke softly, as though afraid to disturb the air. Each morning, Eleanor walked the length of the garden, her breath rising like smoke in the cold, her gloved fingers brushing the brittle stems of roses long withered. The world had called her barren, yet everywhere she looked, nature defied the cruelty of that word. Beneath the snow, life waited, patient, unseen, unstoppable. She drew strength from that thought, and, in its company, began again. The nearest village, a modest cluster of stone cottages and winding lanes, had always looked upon Whitmore Manor with awe. When Eleanor arrived, veiled and solemn, the people pitied her quietly, but soon came to admire her gentleness. She brought food to widows, medicine to the fevered, and books to the small school, where children learned by candlelight. In her grief, she had discovered purpose. Charity, she told herself, was not penance, it was reclamation. Each Sunday, the parish vicar would bow deeply when she entered the chapel. He once remarked that she seemed less a fallen lady than a saint misplaced among mortals. She smiled at that, though her heart disagreed. Saints did not ache at twilight or start awake from dreams of a ballroom gone silent. It was during one such dusk, when the horizon burned violet and gold, that she first noticed the package upon her doorstep. A simple white rose, bound by a blue ribbon, lay atop an envelope with no signature. Inside, a folded card bore only 2 words, for endurance. Eleanor turned the rose in her hand. Its petals were fresh, untouched by the frost. Someone had gone to effort, someone who knew her isolation and sought, quietly, to defy it. She placed a flower in a vase beside her window, uncertain whether to feel comforted or afraid. Weeks passed. Each Thursday, without fail, another white rose appeared. The same blue ribbon, the same wordless offering. The villagers began to speak of a secret admirer, and their speculation warmed the chill of her solitude. Eleanor dismissed it as kindness, perhaps from a servant of the Duke's household or some distant friend who pitied her. But when the fifth rose came tied with a scrap of parchment reading, "You have not been forgotten," something inside her stirred, a fragile spark long denied flame. Beyond Kent, the London season bloomed without her. In the drawing rooms of Mayfair, Lord Whitmore paraded his new companion, Lady Beatrice Linwood, their union all but assumed. Yet whispers had begun to shift. Some said the former Lady Whitmore had become a recluse of rare virtue, a woman who tended to orphans and wrote letters of encouragement to soldiers' widows. Others, less kind, mocked her devotion as the affectation of the shamed. The Duke of Ashbourne had heard every word. At political dinners, when her name surfaced as jest, his gaze grew cold. "Lady Whitmore," he said once, his tone cutting through laughter, "possesses more grace in exile than most of London possesses in triumph." The remark silenced the room, and though he spoke no further, his defense was remembered. In March, the Duke's carriage rolled through the rain-soaked roads of Kent. He was not a man given to impulse, yet something in him refused to remain idle. When he arrived at Whitmore Manor, the air smelled of damp earth and wild violets. The butler, startled, ushered him into the parlor, where Eleanor sat by the fire, embroidering in the soft light. She rose at once, astonishment flickering across her composed features. "Your Grace," she greeted, her voice calm but guarded. "Surely London offers you more amusement than this lonely place." The Duke inclined his head. "London amuses only those without conscience. I fear I have developed one." It was not gallantry nor flirtation. It was truth wrapped in restraint. He studied her face, the strength beneath her pallor, the intelligence in her stillness, and for a moment forgot the script society demanded. She gestured for him to sit, and as he did, the firelight drew shadows along his features, softening the distance between them. "I received your roses," she said finally, her tone neutral but her eyes searching. He hesitated, the faintest smile curving his lips. "Then my efforts were not wasted." Her fingers tightened around her teacup. "Why? What pity compelled you to such secrecy?" "Pity." He looked at her, steady and unflinching. "No, my lady. London pities. I do not. I only wish to remind you that truth, unlike rumor, survives the winter." The silence that followed was delicate, charged. In it, the clock ticked softly, the fire murmured, and outside, rain tapped against the glass like a hesitant confession. She wished to thank him, but gratitude felt insufficient. Instead, she said quietly, "You should not have come." "Perhaps," he replied, rising. "But there are duties one owes to decency and to memory." He turned toward the door, then paused. "Your husband was not the only one London deceived. The truth will find its hour." After he departed, Eleanor found a small box upon the chair where he had sat. Inside lay the necklace that had once been hers, a family heirloom she believed lost after her exile. The sapphires glimmered faintly in the firelight, like fragments of a forgotten sky. Beneath it, a folded slip of paper bore a line in his hand. Asterisk, "You should wear what was always yours." Asterisk. That night she did not sleep. She sat beside the fire, the necklace resting in her palm, its weight both comforting and unbearable. She thought of the Duke's words, of the restrained fervor in his voice, and the faint echo of respect that no gossip could tarnish. For the first time since her disgrace, she felt not invisible, but seen. By dawn, a thin mist had settled over the estate. When her maid entered with tea, Eleanor noticed another paper, slipped beneath the door. It bore no seal, only 6 words written in a firm, elegant hand. Asterisk, "Forgive London. It never deserved you." Asterisk. She read the words twice, her breath trembling in the quiet. Then she pressed the note to her heart, as if its warmth might steady her resolve. Beyond the window, The first crocuses had broken through the snow, pale and determined, defying the season's cruelty. Eleanor smiled faintly. Spring was coming, and with it, perhaps, the truth he had promised. Yet for now, she remained still, the Duchess's note resting against her palm, her gaze drifting toward the horizon where winter met dawn, a woman neither broken nor redeemed, but waiting for the hour when both might become one. April brought London back to life, its carriages rumbling once more along rain-slick streets, and its parlors buzzing with gossip like bees drunk on scandal. In that gilded hive of judgment, one rumor bloomed brighter than the rest, the return of Lady Eleanor Whitmore. Word traveled faster than carriages, carried by tongues too polished to admit their cruelty. Some claimed she had been summoned by the crown for her charitable works in Kent. Others whispered that she intended to seek reconciliation with her estranged husband. None guessed the truth, that she had been invited, personally, by the Duchess of Marlborough to the upcoming royal charity ball at Windsor Castle. The invitation, sealed with the royal crest, had been written at the quiet suggestion of the Duke of Ashbourne. When Eleanor received the letter, she studied its elegant script beneath the pale light of morning. Her instinct was refusal. To return to London was to walk once more into the jaws of the city that had devoured her dignity. Yet the Duke's words, written weeks before, lingered in her thoughts. Asterisk, the truth will find its hour. Asterisk, perhaps this was that hour. And so, with measured resolve, she packed the few gowns she had not sold, instructed her maid to prepare the carriage, and departed the calm of Kent for the merciless beauty of the capital. London, when she arrived, was, as she remembered, grand, glittering, and heartless. Her former home had been leased by Lord Whitmore to foreign dignitaries, its windows dark as if in mourning. Eleanor stayed instead at a modest townhouse lent by a cousin. There, she readied herself for the ball with the same care one gives to facing an old wound. Her dress, pale blue trimmed in silver, carried no trace of extravagance. It was the color of frost beneath morning sun, quiet, resilient, and unwilling to fade. The night of the Royal Charity Ball dawned crisp and bright, the kind of evening when London's elite gathered to parade their wealth disguised as benevolence. Carriages lined the courtyard of Windsor, their lamps glowing through the mist. Inside, the palace glittered crystal chandeliers, golden moldings, and music that rose like breath through the vaulted ceilings. When Eleanor stepped through the doors, a hush rippled faintly through the crowd. Recognition flickered in their eyes. Admiration and malice shared the same glance. She held her head high. Dignity, she had learned, was not in denial but endurance. As she moved through the throng, faces turned, whispers coiled. "Lady Whitmore," someone murmured behind a fan. "Back from the country? How brave, or how desperate?" Eleanor ignored them, offering smiles where civility required, silence where it did not. Her pulse steadied with each step. She was no longer the frightened wife who had fled that glittering cruelty. She was something quieter and far more formidable. From across the ballroom, the Duke of Ashbourne watched her entrance. His eyes, sharp yet reverent, followed her progress through the sea of silk and jewels. He had not expected her to come. When last he saw her, he had left her with truth half-spoken and a promise unfulfilled. Now seeing her stand so calmly beneath the chandeliers, he felt both pride and fear. Pride for her courage, fear that his next words might undo it. Their paths crossed near the gallery stairs, where portraits of long-dead monarchs gazed down in eternal judgment. He bowed, formal but sincere. "Lady Whitmore," he said, his voice low, "London has grown dull in your absence." She met his gaze evenly. "I suspect London prefers me absent, your grace. I have given it too much to ever entertain it again." He smiled faintly, as though at her restraint. "You've given it what it cannot comprehend, truth." "Truth," she replied, "is the one currency society devalues quickest." Their words carried weight beyond conversation. Each syllable was a step toward something neither dared name. He offered his arm, and she hesitated before taking it. Together, they walked through the marble corridor that led to the conservatory, away from the crush of voices. The scent of roses drifted from the hothouse, mingling with candle smoke. The Duke paused near the tall glass windows, where the moon poured silver across the floor. "I owe you an apology," he began, "for my silence when your husband slandered you. I should have spoken then, but I feared my defense would only deepen your disgrace." Eleanor turned toward him, her expression unreadable. "And yet you speak now. Why?" "Because silence is no longer noble," he said quietly. "And because I cannot bear to see you defined by a lie I have the power to end." Her pulse quickened. "A lie." He stepped closer, his voice lowering. "Your supposed barrenness, your husband's accusation, was false. He sought to secure his inheritance through another woman. His physician confessed the deception before leaving England. I had the statement verified, but by the time I could act, your reputation had already been tried and condemned." For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. The noise of the ballroom faded, replaced by the distant hum of her own heartbeat. She stared at him, searching for deceit, but his gaze held only sincerity. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew, and you said nothing." "I thought to protect you," he replied. "But protection through silence is still betrayal. Forgive me." Her composure cracked just enough to reveal the ache beneath. "Forgive you? For what? Truth delayed, or pity disguised as virtue?" He reached for her hand, hesitated, then let it rest over his own. "For cowardice," he said simply, "and for loving you too long in silence." The words hung between them, fragile and irrefutable. She tried to pull her hand away, but his touch was gentle, not possessive, an offer, not a claim. "Do not speak of love, your grace," she said softly. "Not here, not after what London made of it." "Then let us speak of honor," he replied. "If I must bear its cost, let it be beside you." For the first time, her gaze softened. She saw not the Duke adored by London, but the man who had carried her shame as though it were his own. "You risk much by standing with me," she murmured. "I risk nothing worth keeping if I stand without you." Silence returned, thick and tender. Beyond the glass, snow began to fall again, rare for April. The ballroom music swelled, muffled by distance. Eleanor exhaled slowly, her defiance melting into quiet comprehension. "You would see me restored," she said. "But what of your name? Your alliances? London will not forgive a man who defies its judgment." "I seek not London's forgiveness," he answered. "Only yours." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. For the first time in years, she did not hide them. "You have it," she said, "though I do not yet understand why." He smiled faintly. "Because understanding often follows forgiveness, never precedes it." At that, he bowed his head, brushing her hand with a reverence more eloquent than any vow. The orchestra began a new waltz, its strains echoing faintly through the corridor. She stepped back, the spell between them trembling, but unbroken. "I must return to the crowd," she whispered. "If we are both to survive this night, let it be as strangers once more." He nodded. "For now." She turned, the blue ribbon of her gown glimmering as she walked away. He watched her go, his heart caught between duty and desire, until she vanished beyond the archway. Outside, snow drifted against the palace glass, melting in silence. The Duke remained where he stood, his reflection ghosted beside hers upon the windowpane. The night was not yet over, and neither was their story. The night of a royal Christmas ball arrived like a benediction upon a city weary of its own vanity. Snow fell in delicate whirls over London, turning rooftops and carriages into pale monuments of quiet grace. At Windsor, the palace gleamed as if draped in starlight, hundreds of candles burning in crystal sconces, each flame mirrored in marble and gold. Nobility from across the kingdom gathered beneath its vaulted ceilings, their laughter echoing like the music of false angels. They came not only for charity, but for spectacle, for gossip, for the chance to witness the living theater that was London's elite. And among them, radiant and unbowed, walked Lady Eleanor Whitmore. Her gown was of silver silk, simple yet devastating in its refinement, its sheen catching the light like winter moonlight upon water. The hush that followed her entrance was not the cruel curiosity of months past, but something tempered, uncertain, admiration forced to recall its conscience. She moved through the crowd with an ease born not of pride, but of survival. No longer did she bow beneath whispers. She had outlasted them. Every step she took through that glittering hall was a quiet declaration. She had returned not to beg acceptance, but to reclaim her name. Her husband was there too, Lord Henry Whitmore, his charm now brittle, his fortunes waning. Lady Beatrice Linwood stood beside him, her smile sharper than the diamonds at her throat. When he saw Eleanor, his expression faltered. He had believed her too humiliated to ever face society again. Yet here she was, serene and unafraid, as though time itself had absolved her. He approached her with the practiced gallantry of a man desperate to rewrite his own sins. "My lady," he greeted, voice smooth, "it seems London has found its most beautiful ghost returned to life." Eleanor inclined her head. "And it seems, my lord, that ghosts are not the only things that haunt London's halls." The words, soft as silk, struck like steel. His composure wavered. "You speak boldly," he murmured. "I learned from the best," she replied, and turned away before he could answer. The Duke of Ashbourne had been watching from across the ballroom. In the months since their confession, he had waited, patient, deliberate, for this night. He had secured the Queen's quiet blessing, prepared every word, and now the moment ripened like destiny fulfilled. Yet even as he watched Eleanor's composure beneath her husband's gaze, he felt the ache of admiration deepen into reverence. She did not need rescuing. She needed only truth spoken aloud. As the orchestra shifted into a waltz, the Duke stepped forward. Conversations faltered at his approach. Few men commanded such natural authority. He bowed slightly before Eleanor. "May I have this dance?" She hesitated only a breath. "You may, your grace." When his hand met hers, a ripple passed through the crowd. Whispers bloomed, scandal poised to unfurl, yet the Duke did not flinch. He led her into the dance, every movement precise and deliberate. Around them, the ballroom blurred. Faces became distant smudges of silk and envy. The chandeliers, mere constellations of light. They moved in perfect rhythm, and in that rhythm spoke what words could not. "You have chosen a dangerous kindness," Eleanor said softly, her eyes fixed on his collar rather than his gaze. "Truth is never kindness," he replied. "It is duty long delayed." "You mean to speak it tonight," she realized. He nodded once. "No reputation is worth more than justice." Her breath caught. "You risk everything." "So be it." The final notes of the waltz drifted away. As applause scattered through the hall, the Duke released her hand, but only to take the center of the ballroom. The musicians fell silent. The Queen's gaze, curious yet unreadable, turned upon him. So did the entire assembly, drawn by the gravity of his composure. He began with measured calm. "Forgive my intrusion upon your festivities, but a matter of honor must be settled before this night concludes." His voice carried easily, commanding, without effort. "Months ago, a lady of this company was condemned by rumor and falsehood, her virtue maligned, her name sullied by deceit. I cannot allow such an injustice to remain unspoken." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Eleanor's heartbeat thundered in her ears. Lord Whitmore's face drained of color. The Duke turned toward her, his eyes unwavering. "You called her Barren," he said, his tone now sharp as tempered glass. "You condemned her to exile for what you yourself caused." He drew from his coat a folded document, the physician's signed confession. "This, my lord, is proof of your treachery, proof that your wife was never incapable of bearing an heir, but rather betrayed by lies of your own invention." The silence that followed was total. Even the orchestra seemed to forget its breath. The Duke's next words fell like judgment. "And I will add one truth more. She carries my heir." Gasps broke like surf against the marble walls. Lady Beatrice's fan clattered to the floor. The Queen's lips curved, not in scandalized shock, but in something close to approval. And Eleanor, caught between disbelief and dawning comprehension, felt the ground steady beneath her at last. Lord Whitmore staggered forward, sputtering denials that only deepened his shame. "You dare." "I dare because you do not," the Duke interrupted. "You left a woman to ruin so you might chase vanity. I will not allow her name to remain tarnished by your cowardice." Eleanor's voice, calm and clear, broke through the noise. "Enough." She stepped forward, her chin lifted, her presence commanding silence more effectively than any decree. Your grace speaks truth, but this is not vengeance. It is restoration. She turned to her former husband, her tone soft but absolute. You freed me once in cruelty. Tonight, I free myself in grace. May you live long enough to understand the difference. The Queen rose, her applause slow and deliberate. Well spoken, Lady Whitmore, she said. And well done, Duke of Ashbourne. England is poorer without courage such as yours. The hall erupted, not with mockery, but with reluctant awe. The very audience that had once feasted on her humiliation now watched her ascension. Eleanor met the Duke's eyes, and for the first time allowed herself to smile, not shyly, but fully, radiantly. The orchestra, as if blessed by Providence, resumed its melody. Later, as the snow deepened beyond the palace walls, they stood together on the terrace overlooking the frozen gardens. The torches burned low. The world seemed made of silver and silence. You should not have done it, she murmured, though her tone held no rebuke. I could not do otherwise, he said. If I am ruined, let it be for something worthy. She turned toward him, the moonlight tracing the curve of her cheek. And if I am to begin again, then let it be beside me. He reached for her hand, not in possession, but in promise. She let him take it, the past dissolving like breath against the winter air. Beneath the stars, two exiles of society stood remade, no longer the barren wife and the silent duke, but man and woman, equal in love and defiance. In the months that followed, London would speak endlessly of that night, of the Duke's declaration, of the Queen's applause, of how Lady Eleanor Whitmore became the Duchess of Ashbourne by spring. But gossip, as always, withered with time. What endured were quieter truths. Charities expanded under her patronage, villages rebuilt, and children educated in her name. On the first Christmas after their marriage, snow fell once more upon the manor in Kent. Eleanor stood at the window, watching the light glow across the garden, where roses now bloomed despite the frost. Behind her, the Duke placed his hand upon her shoulder. They said it could not bloom again, she whispered. They said the same of you, he replied. She smiled, resting her hand over his. Outside, the bells of the village church began to ring, their notes carrying through the cold air like a benediction. And for the first time in many winters, the woman once scorned as Barren felt her world utterly, gloriously full.